You never really know who's living next door, until it's too late. Story 1. The tapping started subtly, a frantic, irregular rhythm against the shared wall. At first, I dismissed it as Mrs. Davison's arthritic fingers drumming on her antique side table. She was a quiet woman, mostly confined to her small apartment, and the occasional thud or scrape was just part of the building's symphony of old age. But the tapping grew bolder, more insistent, especially late at night. It wasn't just a rhythm anymore. It sounded like something trying to get out. Then came the smell, a cloying sweetness, like overripe fruit left in the sun, that would seep under my door in waves. It was masked at first by the usual apartment building odors, stale cooking, cleaning supplies. But it began to claw its way to the forefront, thick and suffocating. I complained to the landlord, a gruff man who promised to have a word. But the smell persisted, and so did the tapping, now accompanied by a low, guttural humming that vibrated through my floorboards. The missing pets were the next domino. My neighbor across the hall, a young woman with a boisterous golden retriever, put up a lost dog poster. A week later, Mr. Henderson's perpetually yapping terrier vanished. Then came the hushed whispers in the hallway, the quick glances towards Mrs. Davison's door. No one saw her, no one heard her. Her mail piled up, a silent testament to her absence. One sweltering August afternoon, the tapping reached a fever pitch. It was a desperate, panicked thudding, punctuated by muffled screams. I couldn't ignore it any longer. Grabbing the heaviest book I owned, I crept to her door. The smell was overwhelming now, thick and metallic, drowning out the sweetness. Hesitantly, I knocked. No answer. The tapping intensified, a frantic plea. Fueled by a primal fear, I pushed. The door, surprisingly, gave way. The apartment was plunged into shadow, the air thick with a suffocating stench that made my eyes water. In the dim light filtering from the hallway, I saw it. The floor was covered in a dark, viscous fluid, and against the far wall, strapped to a crude wooden frame, her body. No, not her body. It was something else. Something twisted, elongated, with too many limbs writhing feebly. And from its chest, a single, pale hand, Mrs. Davison's hand, was reaching, desperately, towards the tapping on the wall. A wall that was no longer a wall at all, but the pulsing, living skin of the thing it was trying to escape. Story 2. The first thing I noticed about Mr. Abernathy was his silence. He moved into the other half of the duplex like a ghost, all his boxes shifted in the dead of night. In a neighborhood of friendly waves and borrowed cups of sugar, his drawn blinds and quiet car were an anomaly. I chalked it up to shyness. Then came the noises. They started a month in, always after midnight. A dull, rhythmic thump, drag, thump, drag, from his side of the living room wall. It sounded wet. I'd tell myself it was old plumbing, or him rearranging furniture, but the sound had a strange, organic quality that made my skin crawl. A few weeks later, the posters started appearing on telephone poles. Missing. Mittens. With a picture of a fluffy ginger cat. Then a beagle named Barnaby. The disappearances became a low hum of anxiety in the community. The smell came next. A coppery, metallic tang that would sometimes waft from his vents, quickly overpowered by the harsh chemical scent of bleach. It made my eyes water. When I saw him scrubbing his front porch with a bucket and brush at 3 in the morning, I started locking my bedroom door. The breaking point was in the garden. We shared a small patch of lawn out back. While pulling weeds near the fence dividing our properties, my trowel hit something hard. I dug around it, my heart hammering against my ribs. It was a small plastic bag. Inside, caked in dirt, was a familiar red collar with a tiny silent bell. Mittens. I didn't call the police. What could I say? My neighbor makes weird noises and I found a cat's collar? They'd think I was crazy, but I couldn't ignore it. That night, fueled by a terrifying cocktail of fear and adrenaline, I crept over to his back window. A sliver of light escaped a gap in the cheap blinds. I pressed my eye to the glass. His kitchen was a workshop. The table was covered in tools I didn't recognize: fleshing knives, curved blades, stretchers. Hanging from a clothesline strung across the room were small, leathery pelts. A ginger one, a beagle-patched one. My stomach lurched. But that wasn't the worst of it. Spread out on his counter, held down by rocks, were blueprints. Not for a house, but for an apartment layout. My apartment. Red circles marked the load-bearing walls, the plumbing access, the spot directly under my bed. And beside the blueprints, sitting in a neat, coiled pile, was the spare key to my front door. The one I'd lost last month. A floorboard creaked behind me. I spun around, my breath catching in my throat. Nothing. Just the wind. I turned back to the window, but the light inside was gone. The kitchen was pitch black. Then, a quiet metallic click echoed from the front of the duplex, the sound of my own front door unlocking. Story 3. The first thing I noticed about Mr. Abernathy in 3B was the smell. A faint coppery scent that clung to the hallway, strongest near his door. I dismissed it as poor plumbing in an old building. The second thing was the noise. It wasn't loud, just a dull, methodical thump. 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 That would start and stop at odd hours of the night. It sounded like someone tenderizing meat, a strange hobby for 2 a.m. Then the posters started appearing on lampposts. Missing. Tittles. With a photo of a fluffy ginger cat. A week later, "Have you seen Rufus?" Showed a smiling beagle. The disappearances became a grim topic of conversation in the local coffee shop. Everyone had a theory, from coyotes to a cruel prankster. I tried to ignore the gnawing anxiety that connected the posters to the sounds from 3B. I told myself it was ridiculous. Mr. Abernathy was a frail, elderly man who always offered a polite, papery smile. He seemed harmless. But the thumping continued, sometimes followed by a low, wet, scraping sound. One night, I couldn't take it anymore. I pressed my ear against our shared wall, the cheap plaster cool against my skin. I could hear his shuffling footsteps, then the distinct, heavy thud of something being dropped onto a wooden surface. Then, silence. The breaking point came last Tuesday. I was taking my trash out when the lid on his overflowing bin popped open. Spilling onto the grimy alley floor was a cascade of cheap, colorful pet collars. Dozens of them. Some had little bells, others had metal tags engraved with names. Tittles, Rufus, Patches, Daisy. My blood ran cold. I ran back to my apartment, my hands shaking so badly I could barely dial 911. The police were calm, professional. They listened to my frantic story about the noises, the smell, the collars. They knocked on his door. When Mr. Abernathy answered, he looked utterly bewildered. He let them search his small, immaculately clean apartment. They found nothing. No tools, no stains, nothing. They apologized to me for the disturbance, suggesting the collars were just a sad collection from a lonely old man. I felt like a fool. As they were leaving, I stood in my doorway, watching Mr. Abernathy give me that same papery, polite smile. Then, I heard it again. A faint sound from his apartment. Not a thump. A soft, desperate scratching. And then, a tiny, muffled whimper. My eyes shot from his smiling face to the wall between our apartments. And I finally understood. The thumping wasn't the sound of him chopping anything on his butcher block. It was the sound of him building a new, thicker one, piece by piece, right up against our shared wall, to better muffle the sounds coming from inside it.